Evidence captured through media. Reasons I have not been able to leave my building or apartment since 2020. COVID and my medical history and harassment from people inside the building are one part, but the violent atmosphere that was strongest in 2020 never went away on my street and continues at various levels today. I don't believe that it's possible so much could have happened without being documented by the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, or some other oversight protective organization, even the FBI or CIA. Something horrible has been allowed to happen here. I do not want to be a political sacrifice, bait, or some kind of sideshow. I am just trying to live. I had childhood PTSD before 2020 from witnessing my grandmother die. These attacks gave me another kind of PTSD. I was told by management that nothing could be done about things happening outside. I am submitting this evidence to explain why I am so scared at the idea of leaving the building and why I feel eviction would result in my death, by sickness, stalkers, or corrupt police. I am begging you to take me seriously and understand there is nothing wrong with me. My reaction makes perfect sense. I have not been able to function. I applied for disability but could not safely access my mailbox after my neighbor followed me out of my unit in January 2024. Audio of The Purge that was played as part of 2 nights of hours-long concerts held next door that felt like they stripped my ear canals while I was inside under quarantine. May 2020. The sound level was far and away above anything even produced by the clubs on a regular night. It was weaponized sound at that level. While protests went on 13 blocks away, something or someone had taken over the street where I live and seemed to be separate from the purpose of the protests. A military psych op or just harassment taking advantage of the chaos. It included a trash can fire, a sleeping bag fire, multiple incidents of gun violence, motorcycles, garbage trucks, people screaming, "Get out, go home," the fire alarm for the building being set off over 30 times for no reason in the last 4 years, buzzing, the building by various sirened vehicles, and pollution that would, gas, my small studio apartment, all which were never problems before 2020. I have wondered if people used COVID and the protests as a cover for a real estate scam. I am begging you to let me stay in my unit as I have nowhere else to go. I have also been poor my whole life and this building's stated purpose was to keep people housed, not push them into homelessness. I have lived here since 2015. Almost a decade. I have lived in Portland since 2012. I am a humanist and should have been able to find sanctuary here with its specific protections for non-believers. I am also a licensed bud tender and medical patient. This is my only home. It seems clear to me something had set out to destroy what was cool weird about Portland. I worry constantly that dissidents have been displaced or are among the 7 to 15 million people who have died from COVID. That would be a genocide. Something similar to Atlanta's Cop City where the area has become a trap for dissidents and a training ground for police and/or military. I am an anti-war civilian. Audio of Behind the Bastards podcast explaining the political atmosphere, kidnappings and chaos. PBS NewsHour also explaining kidnappings and chaos. Police and military having worked together to beat up people for over 100 days in a row. I watched every night over the internet even though I couldn't leave my apartment. Bernie Sanders explaining that Trump had used the military against people, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming election. The local police have asked for overtime pay in case there is a response and people have posted images of boarded up windows on social media. Haymarket Books conference where a girl from Portland explains that private security companies have been harassing downtown Portland. She says they are responsible for extrajudicial killings, tearing down tents, illegally telling people to leave and not return, etc. Please take these outside matters into account. I am just trying to have you understand that I am not exaggerating when I say I have been surviving under duress and I needed medical accommodation and protection from violence. I have explained feeling gangstalked. In many ways the social contract has been broken since 2020 and on a level the authorities lost their authority entirely. I have not felt it was safe to contact anyone for help, and whoever was acting as any kind of authority in the area had participated in the harassment. As it has been said, the building seemed largely abandoned as well. I should not have to leave my home because people have been monstrous and acting like fascists. Universal human rights should be upheld or everything is bullshit. That means everyone is free and equal. No one is to be tortured, enslaved, exiled, murdered, raped, have their stuff stolen, by authorities or anyone else. We have a right to housing, healthcare, food, clothing, consensual love, justice and education. There are 30 points and all of them are something worth living for. I have considered myself a living protest, peacefully defending myself through art as best as I can. Someone got into the building and pushed me into the wall downstairs at one point saying, "No one is coming to save you." I have been trying to save myself. I need to be able to stay in my apartment and I need time to heal and figure out a new future for myself despite these issues. It hasn't helped that, on a smaller scale, many things never stopped. When I asked for camera checks or complained about feeling attacked, I was largely ignored. My body has deteriorated and muscles have weakened. I also got sick and was in so much pain I thought I was going to die 4 days after the last time management maintenance entered my unit in 2022. Throwing me out on the street feels like killing me to dispose of evidence for all that has been done to me the last 4 years. I am going through a period of hunger and stress and I am asking for patience, understanding, and discussion to keep my housing. I need time. Above all, I want to keep my home. Thank you for listening.
Federal snatch vans and overwhelming use of riot munitions, Portlanders continued to fill the streets past the 50th straight day of protests. And the answer to the question, will Portland back down, became increasingly clear. No. Here's my colleague in Getting Exposed to Chemical Weapons, Elaine Kinchin, to continue the story.
The battle against Trump's feds gained Portland nationwide notoriety in the summer of 2020, but many longtime activists on the scene, like Max Smith, considered the whole fight to be, at best, something of a distraction.
A fight in the feds. That wasn't what we were here for. Fighting the feds was like some shit that it was like, I used to call it the Grand Theft Auto a side mission. Like, this has nothing to do with what we're supposed to be doing right now, but we have to complete this to get back in the game, Yeah. And it was really weird. And I think at that moment, I really realized that the distraction was intentional and that this was all getting just diverted to become like a Trump, campaign ad, He's going to come through and support these police unions. And this is his big commercial for it. So it was I felt like it was a frustrating part of the protest because it was really dangerous and people were really getting hurt and kidnapped and all that kind of weird stuff. And then on top of that, it wasn't the fight that I wanted to be fighting, but it's the fight that brings out a lot of people. So a very contrasting and confusing time for sure.
For more on the protests in Portland, I spoke with Jonathan Levinson, multimedia reporter and producer for Oregon Public Broadcasting. Since your story a couple of weeks ago about federal officials taking people in unmarked vans, we've seen a huge increase in the number of protests. What's been the significant driver in the last few days?
Around July 4th, we saw federal officers start playing a much bigger role clearing protesters from around the courthouse and from city streets. And in the past week or so, since they have really taken on this spotlight, we have seen protests go from in the low hundreds to in last night in the many thousands. It's been a dramatic increase of mobilization across the city, really, and a broad cross section. The Wall of Moms has obviously gotten a lot of news. There's now a Wall of Vets. There's increased presence from Black activists in the city. It has just been a re-energized movement across the board.
And yesterday, we also saw Portland police, which we haven't seen in a few weeks.
Ever since the focus of the protests shifted across the street from the Multnomah County Justice Center to the federal courthouse, the federal law enforcement have been playing a much more active role in dealing with the protests. And that just depends on the dynamic of the protest that night, what the crowd's doing, if the Portland police end up getting involved or not. And last night was one of those nights where they did. oftentimes they end up clearing the streets right alongside federal law enforcement, which is, they say they aren't coordinating or operating together. But the reality on the ground is that it appears they absolutely are.
The next several months will be the most important in modern American history. Yes, Donald Trump is a pathological liar. He's a racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, a homophobe, and a religious bigot. Yup, Donald Trump has denied the election defeat that he experienced and is undermining American democracy every day, peddling conspiracy theories and converting the Republican Party into a cult of the individual. Yep. Donald Trump has contempt for a free media and has encouraged violence and the never-before-seen use of the military and federal agents against U.S. citizens.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense understood if you were hungry or you were worried about your light bill or you were sick, it made it that much harder for you to fight for liberation. Trauma acts in the exact same way. And that actually black folks, brown folks, indigenous folks, right, if we actually sat in everything that white supremacy has done to us, we wouldn't be able to function. So we spend a lot of time putting that shit in boxes and pushing it down and pushing it down and pushing it down. And that takes energy. Surviving white supremacy takes energy, right? So much energy that we don't have time for anything else, or does it feel like we have time for anything else? And so we think that unless we get about the business of addressing our trauma, both for practitioners, for our community members, for our impacted family members that most of us, or a lot of folks, tokenize instead of actually imbue with any skills or leadership so they can become the leaders of this movement that they're actually supposed to be. If we don't do that, right, then we're putting Band-Aids on gunshot wounds. Get a massage away, but healing justice as an order. Next thing that needs to happen, and I didn't mention this the last thing, but one of the things that's happening, and her governor, and Trump, right? The law and order drumbeat and all of the violence that we felt in 2015, 16, 17, 18, all of that race hate, right? And women hate and gender hate and sex hate, that is all going to continue to amplify and get worse. And so we better.
So one of the reasons why I felt like challenged by this question is one of, I think, the things that the abolitionist movement needs to work on is having like a clear economic analysis and an analysis around capitalism. And I think that one of the things we need, like a concrete example of this, I'm from Oregon, and in Portland there's a huge shortage of police officers. So all of the businesses in downtown Portland have brought in a private security company who are essentially now a privatized police force in downtown Portland who have zero accountability. The DA can't even figure out how to keep them accountable. And they are killing people, doing citizens arrests, beating people up, tearing down tents, handing people notices saying they need to leave Oregon and they can't return. And so, and if we look at the continent of Africa, that's actually like heavily happened on the continent, where the largest employer on the continent of Africa is Geo Group. That is because private companies have brought in private security companies to protect their capital. And
so folks, for you who don't know, right, you have the President of the United States, right? And one of the big roles of the Department of Defense is to help prevent our country from going to war. That might sound silly, right? A lot of people think you go to war so you can fight. But one of the big roles of the Department of Defense is to deter war. It's one of our diplomatic tools. And one of the other roles is, if we do have to fight, it is to dominate. Two people advise the president. It's the Secretary of the Department of Defense, and that person is a civilian, right? Because we don't want to have a coup in our country. We don't want the military to take over, right?
They're criminal.
Every single one of you in the crowd is the expectation of the coin, which is the quote around the rim. And it says, amateurs train until they get it right, but professionals train until they cannot get it wrong.
And I will arm him with everything that I can so that he will be free of any primitive, medieval, concepts about false patriotism, about boundaries, about the meaning of flags. You know, mankind is much bigger than all of these primitive symbols. And I don't want to see my boy with his face stuck in some rice paddy, off in Vietnam or off in some other land, protecting the interests of the establishment and trying to reward their greed with his life. I'm opposed to it. And I don't want him to be armed with a sense of being able to go off and destroy another human being anywhere in the world whom he's never known.